You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
J.T. Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Thor,
Corey Dr. O,
Brandon Sanders,
Robin Mom,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is... Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I am really excited to have an author who needs no introduction to anyone who has been reading for the last 4 or 5 decades. Dean Koontz has a brand new book. It's called Devoted, with a brand new a new publishing deal with Amazon that has a lot of people talking right now. Welcome to the show, Dean.
Well, thanks for having me there.
I'm excited to have you. Dean, we begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
Well, it goes back to when I was about 8 years old, is the earliest I remember this. And I started when I was, and you have to understand, there were no books in our house. Books were considered a waste of time. And however, I started writing little stories on tablet paper and illustrating them and drawing a cover and stapling the edges. And I put electrician's tape over the staples so nobody hurt their fingers. And I peddled them to relatives for a nickel. And I don't know, for the longest time, I couldn't understand why did I become obsessed with telling stories and actually producing booklets when I was that young. And many, many years later, I think well into my 30s, maybe my 40s, because I'm slow on some things, it suddenly dawned on me that when I was about 4 years old, my mother was in hospital and in rehab for about 6 months dealing with spinal surgery. And my father was a violent alcoholic, and so I couldn't be left with him. And I was left with a friend of hers whose house was just as orderly as ours was dysfunctional. And every night she put me to bed with a story and a cherry ice cream soda. And she would read the story while I had the soda. And one day I suddenly realized from a very young age, I started to associate storytelling with peace, calm, quiet, and a real home life. And I bet that's where it came from. So I was very young. The first thing I ever read, I think it was called The Magic Puppy. So there was a little forecasting in that as well.
Of all of the stories that I've heard of people's first memories, and over 850 that we've recorded so far, by far those stories include an encouraging parent or an encouraging someone of influence that encourages the child to read, and then kind of by osmosis, I think storytelling is birthed out of that. Rarely do I hear of a negative connotation of a parent who discourages or even forbids reading books and buying books and things like that. Do you feel like that first negative experience has almost challenged you and emboldened you to pursue storytelling and your love of books and story to this point?
Well, I think that woman, her name was Louise, my mother's friend, got me on the track at a very young age. And then by the time I was 8 and making little booklets, I was also going to the library in our little town and reading. And I think what it was the encouragement, or at least the example that woman set during those 6 months. And then the fact that I really needed to escape that house. And until I was old enough that I was given a bicycle by an uncle of mine, there was no way to escape it except into books. And I remember by the time I was 11 or 12, I'd read everything in the children's section and the young adult section at the library. And in those days, the librarian wouldn't allow you into the adult section until you were 18. And you might accidentally pick up Peyton Place and have your whole life ruined, who knows. And but when I got to be 11 or 12, and I literally read everything in that library that was right for my age, the librarian said, you've read so much, and I think you're more mature than your years, which was not true. But she was deluded into thinking it was. And she said she would let me into the adult section as long as she approved of the books I wanted to take out. So by the time I was 11 or 12, I was reading things like Dracula and taking out some things like, Marjorie Morningstar, all variety of things. So from an early age, I was reading different things, and that had a big influence on me. So the librarian who allowed that, I give her a lot of credit.
Right. Your writing over the years has included some of the most popular suspense books, things that border on horror or maybe even cross the line at points. And things that kind of get into our head and make us think about the world around us. Do you remember what the first story like that, the first thing that made your pulse pound and made you want to, burn through the pages to find out what's going on? Do you remember what book that was that just lit your imagination on fire?
Well, there's a lot of them over the years. The first one's hard to recollect. The first thing I ever read that I was very young, probably I was 8, 9, around there, was The Wind in the Willows, that I just was fascinated with. The first kind of book I can remember that really I had to turn those pages was between the ages of 14 and probably 20. I went from reading all kinds of stuff to reading science fiction almost exclusively. And I can remember picking up Stranger in a Strange Land by Robert Heinlein. And I had a job. By that time I was 15, 16, I was working in different jobs and in a grocery store. And then I got a summer job at a park, a state park. And one of my shifts was the midnight till 8 a.m. shift in the campground, which is, there's nobody awake or doing anything at 8 to 12 or 12 to 8 in the morning in a campground. So most of the job was being paid to sit there and read. And that was that Heinlein novel. And the first 8-hour shift went by so fast, and I'll never forget that I then read everything I could get by that author. Some were wonderful and some weren't, but
Robert Heinlein was such a gateway drug for so many people.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah. I remember Have Spacesuit Will Travel just completely blew my mind, and I was probably in the 5th grade when I read that, and I was hooked from then.
Yeah, he did it to me. And then a little bit later, just right after I graduated from college, I picked up a John D. MacDonald novel, and I ended up reading 34 novels in 30 days. He so captivated me, and that was a profound influence. That was the writer who showed me really that character could be as interesting as plot. And MacDonald had this habit of, in some books, especially his standalones, he would, not his Travis McGee, he would stop the story to give you the background on a character. It was very unconventional. And the first time he did it, I went, hey, I want to know more what's happening here. And we're into page 2 about this character's history. And then this would go on for like 4 or 5 pages. And when he went back to the story, I wanted to say, hey, wait a minute, I want to know more of this character's background. That was revelatory to me, that you could make the background so interesting and the character so alive that it was equivalent to the plot. And I eventually came to feel the character is what really drives almost every story that you love.
Well, and to the point that some people have described it as character is plot. When you start thinking about a new character, first off, is that what comes to you first when you start thinking about a new story? Is it a character? Is it some sort of plot device that then you find a character to plop down in the middle of? What is usually that kernel of a new story idea?
It frequently is a little premise that comes to me. It's not a plot. It's just it's a little thought about something. Like I've said before, I was coming home from a studio meeting, and you're never in a good mood when you come home from a studio meeting. You want to kill most of the executives you were in the meeting with. And I was in my wife's car, and she had Simon and Garfunkel and Paul Simon on. We're both Paul Simon nuts. And I'd heard this song many times. It was called Patterns. And in the song was a line called My Life is made of patterns that can scarcely be controlled. And for some reason, this time, listening to it, this story idea popped into my head about a character who has the night of his birth, his grandfather is dying of a stroke and hasn't spoken in days, but suddenly sits up in bed, predicts 5 major events in the boy's life, beginning when he's 20. And at the same time, as the boy is not yet born, he's in the other end of the hospital, about to be born. He tells what the birth weight's going to be, that the boy is born with syndactyly of the toes, and all of that proves true. So the other predictions are certainly going to prove true years from now. And that story came to me out of that line in a song. Then I started thinking about the character, and it becomes voice that really matters in that. But sometimes it is the character that comes first. Odd Thomas came to me as a character. I was working on a book called The Face, and into my head came the lines, "My name is Odd Thomas. I live an unusual life," and I had no idea what that was. It was like I was hearing a voice, like I'd suddenly gone sort of schizophrenic. And I turned to a lined tablet, and I wrote down the line, and the next thing I knew, I was handwriting, which I have never done before or since, the first scene of the novel. And in fact, I ended up writing by hand the whole first chapter. And it was totally the character. I had no idea where the story was going, but his voice came to me so strong, so instantly. And the same thing happened with the character Jane Hawk that I wrote 5 books about. I had no idea what story I was going to tell. This character came into my mind, and I said, well, let's see what she's doing. And I started writing some scenes with her, and they just began to flow. So it's one of the great things about this. It's so mysterious where this stuff comes from sometimes that it's fascinating. And it's the thing that is so exhilarating in writing is when that starts to happen. There are a lot of days that are slogging forward, but then those days that are character-driven are just magical.
Speaking of those 2 books that became series, I posted on Facebook yesterday that we were going to record today, and I said, what's your favorite Dean Koontz book? And, got lots of great answers, and, each one of your books has meant something different to someone else. But over and over again, I would get responses like, ask him when there will be a sequel to X, or ask him when there will be a sequel to Y. And this has kind of been a theme over your writing career, is that you write predominantly standalone books, and then people clamor to want to know more about what happens. What is it about certain stories that call out to you to find out what's going on with this character? And what is it about other stories that just leave you personally satisfied to leave some ends dangling?
I wish I really understood the full answer to that, but I think it comes back again to character. There are some characters that haunt you. As a reader, I know that I finish a book and there is no more because it's not a series, and yet I don't want to let go of that character. And I think it comes back to that. I wrote what was supposed to be a trilogy. It turned into 2 books. Fear Nothing and Seize the Night with a character named Christopher Snow, who has xeroderma pigmentosum, which means he dare not go out in sunlight or even live in a brightly lighted room because he cannot process light, and he develops skin cancers. And it's a real disease, and a lot of people don't live long lives with it. But he was such a captivating character. Unfortunately, I got to deliver the second of the 3 books, and my publisher at that time was not enamored of the book. That is a nice way of putting it. And I had just moved to that house, and I was afraid that if I delivered the third, I would destroy the relationship, and I'd have to move already again. So I put it aside and started delivering other books and never got back to it. And I get endless requests for it. And I feel terrible that people were expecting a third and didn't get it. But I also understand why, because that character haunts me. And I think I've begun to find a way that I could do that, even though the first 2 books are still owned by the other publisher. It's character again, Hank. I think that's what it always ends up. Certain characters just spark with people, and they don't want to let go of them.
When well, first off, do you feel like that readers have been conditioned to want series? That because when a lot of writers I talk to, when they sign their first contract, if a lot of times, especially in genre fiction, they'll be asked to, can this be a trilogy or at least a duology? Do you think that publishing has steered some of that, or do you feel like that there are certain tastes that have been made because of the way we publish books?
I think that's a really good question, because I know the pressure you're under. I've once advised writers that this is what publishers push you to do, generally speaking, and that if that isn't what you want to do, you're going to have to resist it. The way I put it is, if you write one novel about bricklayers, they're going to want, and it's a success, then they're going to want 20 novels about bricklayers, and it's sad, because I don't think that's where writers end up doing necessarily their best work. I think there comes a point where you say, okay, that's a very appealing character. As a writer now, I'm talking. That's a very appealing character. I like him, but I've said what there is to be said about him. In the case of Odd Thomas, in the very first book, a promise is made to Odd, and he loses somebody, and a promise is made that this loss is not forever, and it remains important to him throughout the books. And I knew that I was not going to be able to write 20 books with Odd. That at some point that promise has to be kept. Also, he was on a journey. I knew this from book 1. He was a very humble character, but he was on a journey to absolute humility. And I had no idea how I'd ever write that, because this may surprise you, but I'm not absolutely humble. And writing about what you know, it means you're supposed to try to imagine it anyway. So I knew that journey had to come to an end, and so did Jane Hawks. There is a temptation when something works to keep it going. But I sometimes think that's not in the service of the writer's talent, that there's other things you could be doing that maybe would expand what you do and that people would like as much. There's some risk in that, but and I've certainly done books that I think are among my strongest that some readers don't like at all and want me to go back and do this or that. But you have to be true to your inspiration, I think, or otherwise, why do this?
Absolutely. Authors, I have a fantastic new service to tell you about. It's called PubSite. PubSite is a service to help you build your very own website, your home on the web, where you can promote your work and give your fans a place to connect with you. PubSite is a website platform that allows every author, regardless of budget, to have a great-looking professional website. Developed by the book marketing professionals at FSB Associates, PubSite is the new easy-to-use DIY website builder developed specifically for books and authors. Whether you're an author of one book or 20, or a small publisher, PubSite allows you to build, design, and most importantly, update your website pain-free. No need to be dependent on a designer or webmaster to make a small but costly change to your website. Save the money and do it yourself. PubSite is the best platform for authors because it's a book-centric platform. PubSite was built just for authors and small publishers. Every design, feature, and layout is book-centric. They have customized designs for you to use. It's easy to build. No coding or HTML is necessary to create a stunning, professional-looking website with all the features you want. Get a custom domain name, yourname.com. It's simple to update. You can add all of your books, add a blog and a book tour, sell from any retailer, manage your email list and social media, and even do e-commerce. Build your website with a 14-day free trial, then pay just $19.99 per month, which includes hosting. And we offer packages starting at $499 to set up the website for you. Pub-site.com, the place to help authors find their home on the web. Looking for a tool to help you visualize your story before the drafting begins? PlotPens is cloud-based and optimized for any device. There's nothing to download. From the new writer who isn't sure how to tell their story to the veteran who can increase their productivity dramatically, we've had experienced writers lay out a detailed structure for several novels in a series in a matter of a few days. The app takes you through 4 steps of the process: the concept or log line. Make sure you have a solid concept that you can keep coming back to throughout the process. The outline, 12 beats and 3 acts, each has a description of what should be happening with examples. The board, 40 cards. We take the 12 beats and add sub-beats to those, breaking it down even further and being very specific about what should go into each. These also have examples and descriptions. Right. We take those 40 cards and turn them into a to-do list. For a 50,000-word book, it's about 2 cards per chapter roughly. We have a beautiful editor built into the app. You can export your manuscript to a PDF anytime with the click of a button. Let PlotPens help you visualize your writing project. Use code HANK10 to get 10% off PlotPens. PlotPens.com.
Dean, a lot of your books tend to delve into the areas of the supernatural, or maybe they really play with the ideas that there's more to the world than what we can touch and feel. And sometimes those things that are more real than us bleed over into our world, or however you want to convey that. Is that something that just naturally comes in story with you? Are you thinking about things like that? Or what do you feel about the intersection of our world and something else? And why do you think those ideas make such great stories that keep us on the edge of our seat?
Well, I'm a big reader of science, and I always, well, not always. When I was in school, I never liked to read what I was assigned. I always wanted to read something else. But once I got out of school, and it was my choice what to read, I've always read a lot of science and a lot of quantum mechanics in particular. And modern physics basically tells us that the world is a strange and mysterious place. Almost beyond comprehension, even though quantum mechanics physicists will pretend they understand it. Although Richard Feynman, a great physicist, said nobody really understands quantum mechanics. And it shows us a world so deeply layered and so mysterious that I can't get it out of my head once I really wrap my head around the way the universe works or seems to work. And so it comes up in stories. It's not always what you would directly call a supernatural story. I rarely have written anything about a ghost or anything like that. I don't do vampire stories or whatever, but there is a sense in all my work that the world is something more than we think it is, and it's got dimensions that we can't perceive. And I see evidence of this all the time. Certain little strange things have happened to me over the years. And one of the most mundane things is to watch a dog. Dogs' senses are much different than ours. Their sense of smell is 20,000 times ours, and just imagine what that means and how you perceive the world. And if you're a bloodhound, it's 100,000 times our sense of smell. Their hearing is more acute. And you will often see dogs relating to something that you're unaware of. And I sometimes think they see things we don't see. I'm fascinated with all that hidden aspect of the world. And some of my stories are about as straight as suspense novels get, The Husband or Intensity. But very often this sense of something unknown or unperceived haunts even those kind of stories when I write them.
The other thing that crops up over and over, and you already commented about this in your answer there, are dogs and pets seem to always find a place in your stories, or a lot of times do. And also the idea of levity, and there's a lot of humor in your books. The humor is that, I've even heard you say that as you were writing something, if something was funny to you, if you laughed out loud, then you made sure to put that in there because that would translate to the reader. Is that something that you consciously work in to the stories to give us a little bit of a breather and to make sure all of our human emotions are kicking in, or does that just come from your nature?
Well, I've throughout school I was always considered the class clown, so maybe it's in my nature. But I also think that's one of the things that publishers early on in my career really pushed against. When I was at Putnam, when I delivered Watchers, that was an early book that I finally put some humor in. And I had written a comic novel and a couple of other things with humor, but I kept it out of the suspense until I couldn't anymore. And there was more humor in Lightning than there had been in the one before. And my publisher at the time said, "You can't do this. If the reader laughs at something, the mood is lost. The novel is no longer scary or suspenseful." My argument was that no, that's just makes the characters more human. We deal with the vicissitudes of life by laughing. I always say that even the darkest things, when enough time pass, you can look back on them and see humor in them. And if I didn't write some humor into the stories, the characters wouldn't seem fully rounded to me. So I always sort of ignored that advice as much as I could. Some stories call for more humor than others. I remember The Good Guy. I was surprised how the dialogue turned into something out of an old Howard Hawks movie or something, one of those screwball comedies, and yet it's a relentless suspense novel. So I let it happen as it seems natural to the characters. And some books will have more than others. In Devoted, the book that comes out on the 31st of March, a lot of the humor comes through. It has a dog, so there's some of that. But a lot of the humor comes through the villains, who are really a bunch of the most terrifying sociopaths I've ever created, I think. And yet they're unintentionally funny. They don't know they're funny, but they kind of are. And I often say I try to de-glamorize evil because it annoys me when evil in stories or movies is made to be glamorous, because it really isn't. And it's the act of a fool. Evil works for a while, but not in the long term. And so these characters in Devoted just struck me as pretty darkly funny. And nowadays, I don't get any pushback on that kind of thing, and partly because it turned out readers didn't mind it at all. They liked it.
Well, when your publisher said that that comedy, takes away the suspense, I think it's actually the opposite. I think allowing people to smile and breathe lets them drop their defenses, which then allows you to kind of sucker punch them again, which is a great device for a writer, I would think.
It's a perfect example of that pops to my mind from movies is in Jaws, where Richard Dreyfuss gets a funniest line in the thing, and an instant later the giant shark pops up at the bow of the boat.
Exactly.
And as soon as the audience is laughing, then Spielberg hits them with the biggest shock they've gotten yet. And that's why it's one of the many reasons it works. But again, there's a lot of common wisdom that is not wise, and I guess that's true in almost everything in life, but it's certainly true in writing and what advice writers are often given.
Well, from your time in college, where you wrote that first Atlantic Monthly story that was published and won you in the fiction competition, up until now, how has the tools and the mechanics of writing changed for you? Obviously, you're writing on computers and stuff now, and I know that you said with the Odd Thomas situation, you wrote out longhand that first scene. But what was it like in the early days when you first started? Were you writing on typewriter or longhand? How was that going?
I started out on just a manual typewriter and graduated quickly to the IBM Selectric. And I was slow to move to computer because I do a lot of rewriting, and I don't know, it didn't dawn on me at first that the computer would actually make that so much easier. And I was so sure that if I left the Selectric, I wouldn't be able to learn the other ones well enough and fast enough to stay on my deadlines. And finally, one day, my wife, after I finished a novel, the last one I ever wrote on a Selectric, she said, okay, here's the amount of typewriter or typing paper we bought. Here's the number of finished pages in the script. You threw away 31 pages for every page you kept. And I hadn't realized how often I was retyping a page. And when I began to realize the laborious nature of that could be alleviated by a computer, where you can just so quickly go through a page and make changes, you don't have to retype everything on the page. Then I broke down, got the computer, but my first was an IBM, what did they call them? Display writer. It was a gigantic thing. It was, it looked like something that belonged on the set of Star Trek, when just huge and it was. In fact, in those days, mostly those were in newsrooms. And then I was on that for years, and then moved to computer. And just this past weekend, I got a brand new one. So I keep moving forward. And God, I just love the ease of writing Microsoft Word with as compared to, because I do rewrite so much and revise so much. This makes it such a simple thing to go through a page 20 or 30 times as opposed to what it used to be.
Do you find that that has changed your creative process when you're not retyping 31 pages, but able to kind of make amends on the fly and keep going? Did that help keep the story flowing as you went?
Well, it didn't change my fundamental way of working. I'm often asked do I ever have writer's block? I blocked on the term. It's so scary. And I always say, no, I've never had writer's block. But I know where it comes from. It all comes from self-doubt. And even though I've never had writer's block, I have more self-doubt than any writer I've met. But I've always dealt with it by not moving on to page 2 until I've got page 1 as smoothly written as I can get it, to the limits of my talent. And then I move on to page 2, and then the doubt comes right back, and I have to go over that page again and again and again. At the end of the chapter, I print out in pencil, because when you read on paper, you see things you didn't see on the screen. And I sort of build a book like coral reefs are built, with all these little dead calcareous skeletons. And people say, well, how do you keep momentum going? And the strangest thing is you become so deeply involved in the story that way that the momentum doesn't diminish. But because I'm not rushing through 10, 12 pages a day, there are some days when I can do that, when I can get to 10 pages that I've gone through each page that number of times. Those are long days. But when you work that way, one of the great benefits is that at some point, always in every story, you get to certain points and you realize somewhere down the road you have a problem, and you know what it's going to be, and it stops you dead. You think, I can't deal with that. I've screwed up. I didn't realize that there's going to be, this story doesn't work because of this issue or that issue. But when you work the way I do, it's a long time till you're going to get to that point, maybe a month. And during that month, your subconscious is working. And inevitably, you get to that point and you've resolved the issue. Sometimes you get there and you've thought of 2 or 3 ways to resolve it, but it isn't something you've concentrated on consciously. So I think that's just a benefit of getting so immersed in the line-by-line writing of the book that it gives your subconscious time to, well, shall we say plot, or to work out those knots in the narrative.
A friend of mine, Steve Bowyer, writes similar to that, and he calls it onioning, where you write a page and then you go back and you go back over it, and you just add layers and layers of detail, or change things, or just, stripping off a layer or adding a layer. And then, when you're finished with that one page, maybe it's 3 pages, because the story has just kind of become alive and grown as you go through those line by lines. So I like that idea. You said in the past that you give your characters free will and agency. That sounds like one of these writerly things that we can say, and people let you get away with it because you're a writer. But what does that mean to you, that your characters are alive and they can do anything that they want to do?
It's the most difficult thing when I talk to a younger writer for me to try to explain, and it is essentially the most exciting thing about writing. When a character comes alive, and it can sometimes happen in the first page, but it's usually you begin to see the character coming alive somewhere between pages 6, 7, and 25, and every story is a little different than that. By coming alive, I mean it's not just a character. You begin to see there are things about this character that you don't know, that are going to evolve out of what you've got so far that you've begun with. And there are going to be surprises. And when the character comes alive, it's just the most amazing thing. I say I give them free will to do what they're going to do, because I have learned over the years that if I'm in the middle of a scene and a line comes into my head and I start typing it, I think, oh, no, I can't let that happen. I can't let him do that. That's just over the top stupid. I've learned, no, pay attention. The character is talking to you. I remember when I was writing Life Expectancy, I had 2 men in an expectant father's lounge, and I knew that their lives were going to get tangled up forever in ways I still didn't fully understand. And the one was going to be good and the other was going to be a very, very bad guy. And I didn't know who the bad guy was. And this is right at the beginning of the novel. And as I was typing along, I said, and and across the room sat, and I typed, the word clown came into my head. And I stopped and said, clown? What do I mean by that? Just some jerk, some idiot? And then I thought, no, I mean clown. And then I thought, no, that makes no sense at all. I can't have a character sitting in an expectant father's lounge in a clown outfit. And then I thought, listen to the narrator, because every scene in a novel I write is from the point of view of one character in that scene. I don't do omniscient within one scene in a whole novel, yes, but and I thought, this is this character telling me the other guy in the room with him is a clown. And I made him into a kind of Emmett Kelly clown, with dresses like a hobo with a painted nose and all that, but not big floppy shoes or all the strange flamboyant clown stuff. And I thought, well, trust this character. By that time, I'd learned to trust characters. Well, I think anyone who read that book would now say it's impossible that book could have been that book if the character hadn't been a clown. There had to be a circus traveling through town, and it turns out that circus and the people in it become really fundamentally important to the entire story, not just to what happens, but to the thematic structure of the story, to what it's about under the story. And it's something that I find exciting, and it's impossible to explain. But if a character is really real, and you give them free will, they take the story places you didn't expect to go. And it's one of the reasons very early on I stopped outlining, because I found the outlines force characters to do things that the characters didn't want to do if they were real and well evolved.
Dean, we talked a few minutes ago about the changes in technology for writers, but over the years, we've seen the industry of publishing change quite a bit, no more so than maybe over the last 10 years or so, when we have seen the ebook revolution and the Kindle revolution, and then, of course, Amazon being a major player in that, and the way that we shop for books has changed. The way that books are delivered to us have changed. The way that we promote and market books have changed. You recently signed a 5-book deal, I believe it was, with Amazon for their in-house publisher, Thomas and Mercer. What was it that drew you to Amazon to publish, and what do you think about the state of publishing today?
Well, publishing is going through massive change, and a lot of people in the industry are not figuring out how to cope with it. And it can be hugely frustrating when I'm not the only writer who will tell you this. A lot of people will tell you this. You see advertising, publicity, promotion, co-op advertising start to disappear because everybody's afraid that doesn't work anymore. But they're not necessarily replacing it with anything. And I watched this, and I watched... I liked everybody I worked with at Random House Bantam, and it was very sad to me that I came to the decision I had to make a change. But my agents came to the same decision independently. And when I had written, Amazon had come to me, Amazon Original Stories, a little bit different than Thomas and Mercer, had come to me and asked me to write a novelette that they would promote and illustrate. And I wrote one called Ricochet Joe, and it did very well for them. And I like the novelette form because you're done in a few weeks, not months and months and months like with a novel. And then they asked if I would write a series of novelettes featuring the same character, and I came up with this character called Nameless because he has no name. And we made a deal. They published 6 stories of that. And my experience with the people at Amazon Original Stories was very exciting. I mean, their sense of marketing was so much beyond anything I had seen before.
Yes.
It was bizarre. It was amazing. And when I decided after I delivered the final Jane Hawk that I needed to make a change, my agent said, we want to include Amazon along with all the other publishers we submit this proposal to. And I said, well, I can understand that for novelettes, but should we really go there for novels? Because, for one thing, Barnes & Noble won't carry those books. And my agents made a very good case that we should at least include Amazon because I'd had such a good time working with the division that did the novelettes. So we included them, and their offer came in we had 8 offers, and their offer was right with the best of the other publishers, but the difference was the marketing plan. The other publishers either gave a 1-page or a 2-page marketing plan. Amazon came through with a 40-page binder of their marketing plan.
Whoa.
And when I looked at it, I said, all right, this is very different. My agents made the case that your books might not be in a lot of stores, but you're going to sell more and you're going to reach more readers. And I now believe that's true because after I accepted the Amazon deal and began working with them, it's a different group of people, but I'm just as nice as the others. I mean, they're a very enthusiastic group and very creative. And after I had taken this deal, the Nameless stories came out, and we just passed 3 months of those being available, and we're nearly 2 million downloads of the Nameless series. And it's fascinating to me. This will redound, I think, to the sales of Devoted when it comes. Now, one of the things that was so odd about it was they said, we want to give these stories away. We'll allow people to buy them, but we also want to give them away to people on Amazon Prime who want them as a bonus for being an Amazon Prime. And I said, well, how does that work? And they said, well, the way we look at it, we count that as a sale. To us it is, because it's a benefit to us if the people who sign up for Prime are happy. And it was such an amazing thing. They have this sort of rule at Amazon that everyone is a customer. Their suppliers are not suppliers, they're customers. The people, not just the people who buy from Amazon, but the people who sell to Amazon are treated like customers. And writers are treated like customers. And it's truly a strange and interesting change, but one that's for the better, I think. So I don't know. I could end up falling on my face, but so far it looks pretty good.
Well, the Nameless series is just absolutely fantastic, and each one of those is 55 pages or so, give or take a novelette. You could easily consume those in an afternoon and in a seating a lot of times, and I love the whole format of those.
I love the novelette form because you can do. When I decided to do those, I said, okay, we're going to try to give it the same experience of a novel in this very condensed form. And that meant the same kind of color, characters that come alive for you like they would in a novel where you have more time to know them, and some real surprises in the course of each story. And it was a challenge, but it was also a lot of fun. And I don't know. We may end up doing more of these down the road, and I wouldn't mind at all.
Well, the new book that we're ultimately here to talk about today, which when people are hearing this interview, today is release day, and it'll be available on your Kindle, as we talked about, or in hardcover and audiobook. Any way that you enjoy books, you can grab it, and there's links to it in the show notes of this episode. But this book is really intriguing to me. When I first got my copy of it, I tore into it. And of course, there are things that we would expect. There's a child who's a little odd. There's a loving mother who, is constantly worried about him. And there's sort of this existential, bigger than life threat. And of course, there's a dog. Tell us where this story came from for you.
It's of course I had written this novel that has been, I guess, for most people, my signature book, Watchers, which is a big dog story, but it's also a big, scary adventure story. And And I was reading some science one day and came across this. There are three basic categories of life on the planet. One is includes mammals and all other animals and insects, everything that's alive, in above the form of bacteria. And then the second life form, and plants are not necessarily part of what I'm describing here. The second is bacteria, and the third is archaea, which is this that for many years until a couple of decades ago was thought to be a bacteria, but in fact we now understand it as a different life form, and it has the most amazing capability of passing genetic material across species. Until this was discovered, it was always thought that inheritance was entirely vertical. It came down from your grandparents, your parents. It came down from the puppies, grandparents, and whatnot. But we now know that this life form can take genetic material from one species and put it into another. And it's partly simply what it does. It's part of the way nature evolves things. And I thought, wow, at some point I can see somebody taking this and trying to use it for nefarious purposes. Although I'm an optimist, I always think of the nefarious purposes that people can put things to. And that started me, that I thought there's a story in that can be really scary. And for some reason, I thought almost at the same time, I was thinking about the human-dog bond, which I thought of a lot, which I find mysterious and wonderful. And it occurred to me, I could tell a story, not a sequel or prequel to Watchers, but one that deals with the human-dog bond and the magic of it in a different way, and that says, after 100,000 years of humans and dogs living together and working together, it would be very natural if some dogs began to become more intelligent. And what if that's already happened, and there are strains of dogs out in the world that have abilities that we don't recognize, and that in some way, in one way in particular, I don't want to give anything away, is superior to ours. And what if these dogs actually have a secret community? They call themselves the Mysterium because they have no idea where they came from. They don't understand why they are what they are. And these two elements came together, and I realized, these are part of the same story. And once I got it started, this thing was just an absolute joy to write for me.
The character of the little boy in the book, was that something that you had been thinking about this this youngster who had so much going on but couldn't communicate? Where did he come from?
My wife and I have worked for 25, 30 years with a charity called Canine Companions for Independence that produces assistance dogs for people with severe disabilities. And it's an amazing organization. They produce them for no charge to the people who receive them. And they mainstream a lot of people. I've known paraplegics, even quadriplegics, who could not live alone before, but with the right dog who can do all these tasks for them, they get a tremendous amount of independence and many times live alone with the dog. And here a number of years ago, CCI began to provide socializing dogs for children with autism. And it's amazing to watch what a socializing dog can do. When the child and the dog are bonded, the meltdowns, as they're sometimes called, that autistic children go through, virtually stop. The children become much more socialized. They're still autistic, but most of the difficult behavior goes away simply because of the dog and human bond. And that has fascinated me for some time. So I realized that part of what this story would be is this boy, Woody, would be fatherless because his father died in an accident that would turn out not to have been an accident. And Woody would be autistic, about 11 years old, and never spoken a word in his life. And that the encounter with this dog, this really special dog, would do far more for him than an assistance dog could do. And that, I think, added a level to the story that made it really special to me.
And I'll tell you what, the relationship of Woody and the special canine connection is, not only is this book a page turner and a gripping thriller, like, as good as any that you'll ever read, but man, does it get you in the feelings, and that's what I love about your books. It's such a wild kind of gamut of emotion, and I think that's what keeps us coming back for more and more. We know we can depend on you to take us to all those places.
Well, it's the human experience is fascinating because of its depth and complexity, and that's the challenge when you're writing, is try to convey all those things we feel and know in life, and not just the fear and the rest of it that makes a good thriller.
Right. Well, Dean, I know that if this book is out for sale now, that means you've got to have another one in the chute that you're working on for your next release. Can you tell us anything about it?
Amazon already has it. It's already gone through editing. It's a book called Elsewhere, and I think it comes out in October, but I'm not 100% sure about that. It might change. But it's very different than Devoted, but again, I've just become creatively energized by the change of publishers, and so I feel 20-something again creatively. So I hope that lasts for another 10 years anyway.
I love it. Well, the new book is called Devoted, and when you're hearing this, it'll be available to purchase everywhere. There's links to it in the show notes of this episode. Dean, if people are just want to dig into all the great stuff that you do, I know that you've been collecting information, all of your back catalog and little bits and pieces that people could learn about all the stuff that you do at your website. Can you tell them where they could find that?
Yep, it's www.deankoontz.com.
Excellent. Dean, this has been so much fun chatting and getting to talk about the new book and everything that you do. Thank you so much for taking time to come on the show today.
Well, thank you for having me there, and I hope I didn't blather too much.
Wargate Books presents Hit and Fade, Forgotten Ruin, Book 2, by Jason Anspach and Nick Cole, narrated for you by Christopher Ryan Grant. Chapter 1. The army of the dead walked straight into our ambush east of Fortress Hawthorne. That's what the FOB is called now, Fortress Hawthorne. Despite it being officially known as Forward Operating Base Hawthorne, as was originally intended when the 50 detachments of various special operations groups came forward through time from Area 51. A one-way mission to save Western civilization from a rampaging nanoplague destroying the very fabric of said civilization. Apparently, we overshot the temporal insertion point and stuck the landing. Sorta. About 10,000 years too late. Said civilization is now basically something straight out of Tolkien or Dungeons and Dragons, which we've all now gotten a lot more familiar with thanks to our resident expert and fledgling hedge wizard, the infamous PFC Kennedy. But the Rangers just call it the FOB. The first of our explosives to ruin the leading elements of the army of the dead advancing on us, Claymore mines the recaptured forge back at Hawthorne had cranked out in the weeks after we'd retaken it from King Triton, were fired by Ranger Sergeant Kang down there with the Scouts and Captain Knifehand's assaulters. It was close to midnight when the front rank of bony warriors, carrying rotting shields and spears, eyes glowing malevolently in the deep night mist, advanced into our ambush, only to get ruined by the daisy-chained claymores' sudden eruption. Above us, a cloud-shrouded moon cast a wan yellow light over the battlefield. The night was hot, and spring was coming on full now. The pilots who'd gotten us here in the grounded C-17 back at Ranger Alamo, using their meteorology skills, had guessed it was going to be a long, hot summer ahead of us, and an early one at that. But there was a cold shiver in the dark on your exposed skin that you couldn't quite explain when you saw the dead advancing rank after rank. The bone warriors, carrying spear and shield. Other, darker creatures barely seen. The lower areas of the earth were graveyard cool and misty, so maybe that was it. Still, the brutal, unrelenting cold of our almost last stand back at Ranger Alamo was gone now. But not the horrors. There wasn't a night that some ranger didn't wake up out of a tormented sleep, breathing heavy, sidearms scanning the dark and looking for orcs and ogres to ventilate. I was sweating in the hour leading up to the attack, despite the night and the mist. Kurtz had us humping hard to get the 240 and all its ammo up to the top of a small hill that overlooked the area where we'd channel the advancing echelons of the Army of the Dead into further fun and games the Rangers had planned at a bend in a riverbed. If the approaching Army of the Dead continued on their current course track, they'd enter it for a brief period. It was decided by the captain we'd kill them there. And I was sweating. Not because of fear. No, not at all. "Firing," whispered Sergeant Kang over the comm as he detonated the mines. And 8 daisy-chained claymores spat thousands of steel balls all across the front line of what even I was still finding it hard to believe I was seeing through my night vision device. Skeletons. Warrior skeletons. Ancient warriors like something out of the Bronze or Iron Ages. Worked breastplates of molded plate or rotting scales. Green and tarnished, stamped with the markings of fabled armies fallen in battles long, long ago. Leather cuirasses on some, rotting boots, helms with broken horns, missing teeth, tattered leather kilts, beads and charms dangling from bone wrists, enigmatic holy signs and primal torques black with grave dirt, or from a funeral pyre long ago on some forgotten battlefield far from here, draped about the spine where the throat should be, where it rises to connect to a bone-white skull that seems filled with malevolent purpose and diabolical intelligence, malignantly so. Walking skeletons like something out of a Ray Harryhausen clay model Sinbad epic from the 1960s. Above, the sliver of moon gave enough light to strengthen our NVGs, making the night vision devices perform exceptionally well as we sprang our trap and watched the advancing elements get rocked by our initial high-explosive opening bid in the game we were about to play. The air was still and hot in the moments before the fight began as we lay there in the tall, sharp grass, waiting for it all to go down. I was thinking a hot cup of coffee would be nice about now, except my canteen only had cold coffee I'd brewed during the long, silent, and windy afternoon of preparation. Still, I was happy knowing I had some, rather than none.
Authors, if you're looking for a partner to help ensure that your book is the best it can possibly be, look no further than Pico's House. Crystal and her staff make a conscious effort to be critical yet courteous. They also strive to make the business side of things run smoothly so that you can rest easy knowing that your manuscript is in capable hands. Whether you need beta reading, developmental editing, a manuscript critique, line editing, copy editing, or proofreading, Pico's House is the one-stop shop for you. Check them out today at picoshouse.com to get started.